Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 3. Adil wasn't fond of keeping secrets. He was less fond of keeping secrets from those that he cared about, and even less so of keeping secrets for a military organization, even if it was one that his girlfriend was a part of. Keeping Petra's secret, and it is Petra's secret, he told himself, because if he allowed himself to think of it any other way, think of it as her secret, all bets would be off, and he would be running off to Telly, the words spilling from his lips. So it was Petra's secret, and even with that thought ingrained in his brain, it still took every ounce of willpower that he had not to find Telly and tell her everything he knew, everything that he could say to ease her suffering. He had almost told her when she had approached him after drill, bloodied and wild-eyed, asking about his working. But Petra's voice had rung clearly in his mind, and so he lied to his friend. And when he saw the confusion and pain that stemmed from those lies, he ran. He didn't think going to Petra would actually change anything. She was the general of the United States Army. And who was he? No one. A refugee. A guest. Sure, he was dating her daughter, but Adil was certain that didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things, and he quickly found out that he was right. But going to Petra and pleading with her to help Telly had at least taken some of the guilt off of his shoulders. Even if she had refused, even if he had left the room angrier and more disappointed than he had been before speaking with her. Adil watched Telly carefully the next few days, and as the days bled on into the next week and the one after that, he foolishly allowed himself to think that maybe she would be okay. Maybe she was moving on from missing Alder. Maybe she could handle the grief of losing someone that important to her. Maybe there would be no more incidents. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. It happened 2 weeks and 3 days after Adil's talk with Petra, after Telly was first convinced that she had seen something by the biddies' old dorm. The 4 of them, Adil and the 3 girls, were walking along the path from the mess hall to the ref room, the skies above them dark and grey, as if it were going to start raining at any moment. Riel had just finished saying something particularly witty, causing her 2 sisters to burst into laughter, and even Adil had a smile over his face, eyes crinkling with mirth, when suddenly Telly stiffened, all signs of humor instantly gone from her body. It took everyone else walking a few steps further to notice that Telly wasn't with them anymore. Body ramrod straight as she stood in place, her head whipping around like it was being dragged around by a chain. Abigail and Riel exchanged nervous glances. "Tell, you okay?" Abigail called out. Do you feel that? Tally ignored Abigail's question, still looking around breathlessly. Feel what? Abigail asked at the same time that Rael asked. Tally, what are you looking for? But Tally just ignored them both, her whole body starting to shift in place as she kept spinning, desperately searching for something that neither of her sisters could see. Tally, Rael said a little harsher, trying to get through to the now frantic girl in front of her. Tally, what the hell are you looking for? Tally's whole body went still again, as her eyes seemed to fixate on something in the distance, something over Abigail's shoulder, down toward the tree line of the forest that ran across the outskirts of Fort Salem. All three of her companions turned to face the direction she was staring at, frowning when they were faced with nothing except the tree line. Tally, I don't see anything. What are you looking at? Abigail sounded confused. For a split second, Adele was also confused, eyes scanning the tree line for a glimpse of something, anything that could provide a hint as to what Tally was staring at. But as he stared at the seemingly empty spot that Tally was staring at, a sudden jolt of realization stiffened his entire body. Tally, he started nervously, unsure of what to do or say to distract Tally from what he was certain she was staring at. I can feel her, Tally whispered almost reverently, like she was afraid of speaking too loud and disturbing whatever trance she had currently found herself in. It's got to be her, right? Who else could it be? Tally, what the fuck are you... Rael was cut off, eyes widening almost comically, as Tally ignored her and started walking down towards the tree line, eyes still fixated on whatever only she could see. Tally! Abigail cried out, staring in shock at her sister's retreating form. It wasn't until Tally broke out into a jog, and then into a full-on run against the flow of cadets, leaving the mess hall, garnering confused glances and mutterings from the people she shoved past, did her sisters start after her. Abigail, the faster of the two girls, caught up to Tally much quicker than Rael did, spinning in front of Tally, grabbing her by the shoulders and forcing her to a stop. Tally! She all but shouted into the girl's face. What are you doing? Where are you going? What are you looking at? Tally looked desperately past Abigail's intense gaze, still fixated on whatever had caught her attention. I felt her, Abigail. I felt her, and I saw that working again, and I felt her. Tally stressed wildly, her eyes finally looking back to Abigail. Who? Abigail asked. Who did you feel, Tally? Alder! Tally cried hysterically, as Rael caught up to them, panting slightly. I could feel her again, and I saw that working, that shimmer, like when someone is invisible. I saw it, and I knew it had to be her. I knew it had to be. Tally was practically in hysterics, words leaving her mouth faster than Rael and Abigail had ever heard them. Further up the path, a group of cadets had stopped to stare at Tally, whispering and pointing in confusion, no doubt gossiping over what was happening. Tally! Rael said forcefully, stepping in between her two sisters to grab Tally firmly by the arms. Tally, listen to me! There was a crack of thunder, lightning streaking across the sky, and Rael had to shout to be heard over it. Alder is dead, okay? Tally gasped like she was on the verge of tears. No, Rael, she is dead, Rael shouted again. I know you miss her, okay? I miss her too. We both do. The whispering of the cadets watching them grew louder at Rael's words, and Abigail turned to face them all. Something interesting happening here? She demanded, letting go of Tally to step in front of her sisters, blocking them from view of the gossiping witches. Fuck off! She shouted. The group of witches slowly dispersed at Abigail's words, reluctant to leave and miss out on whatever was happening. Tears were starting to fall down Tally's face now, as she looked at Riel in such a heartbroken way. Riel wasn't sure she had ever seen that look on someone's face before, but she kept talking. She had to get through to Tally. "And I know you blame yourself for what happened to her." Riel had to continue to shout, to be heard over the storm that was picking up as wind whipped by them. "But what happened to Alder is not your fault, okay?" "How?" Tally shouted back, her voice broken. "How is it not? If we never brought Nicte back alive, if I never pushed for the truth behind the spree to come out, Alder would never have been demoted, and she would have never been out fighting the night the Camarilla attacked. The Biddies wouldn't have been attacked, and she would still be alive. So how exactly is her death not my fault, Riel?" Rain started to fall now, large, cold drops that fell fast, instantly soaking everyone. Riel shook her head, spraying water droplets everywhere. "They wanted her out of power anyway, Tally. You know that. It would have happened one way or another, and it was Alder's choice to help fight when the Camarilla attacked. You didn't force her out there. She chose to do that because, hey, look at me. Look at me." Tally, who had turned to look desperately in the direction she had been running toward, looked back to Riel with a sob. "Alder chose to fight because she was a good person, okay? She wasn't just going to sit around and do nothing. It was her choice to fight, and that's why she died, not because of anything you did. Do you understand me?" Riel was on the verge of tears now herself. The sight of her sister so obviously in pain, causing her pain of her own. She didn't like yelling or being so harsh with her sister either, but she knew she had to get through to Tally. It wasn't healthy for her to cling to the idea that Alder could still be alive, and the fact that Tally had taken off running after nothing had scared Riel more than she cared to admit. "Do you understand me?" Riel repeated, her whispered words practically lost in the wind that was howling around them. For a second, Tally didn't say anything, just stared at Riel, wide-eyed, tears that she probably didn't even know were there, streaming down her face. But then her face crumbled, her body going weak as she fell into Riel's arms with a sob. Riel caught her with a stumble, arms instantly going up to catch her, one hand cradling Tally's head as Tally began to cry uncontrollably. Abigail was there in an instant, wrapping her arms around both her sisters, pressing her face into Tally's hair. "I just miss her so much," Tally sobbed, shaking her head in Riel's embrace. "Like I've never missed anyone before. I don't know what to do." "It's okay, Tal," Riel whispered. "It's okay." She met Abigail's worried gaze with a concerned look of her own, as they both held their sobbing sister in the middle of a raging storm. "We got you." "Tally's in the shower. We have 7 minutes." Riel's voice brought Abigail out of her stupor, and for a brief moment neither girl said anything, as they just stared at each other. They were still both wet and cold from being outside in the storm, but once they had gotten back to their room and Tally had walked in an almost zombie-like state to the bathroom and started the shower, neither girl wanted to protest and take the first shower from her. "So, I didn't realize it was that bad," Abigail said slowly. "Did you?" "No," Riel shook her head in disbelief. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew she missed her, but—" "She's losing it, Ray," Abigail said simply. "Her grief is driving her crazy. We need to tell someone." "Tally isn't crazy, Abs," Riel said defensively. "No, I know that," Abigail said gently, casting a glance towards the bathroom. "But she clearly has some trauma about what happened with Alder. You can't deny that. She needs help." "And we'll help her," Rael insisted. "We can be there for her." "Rael," Abigail took on her bellwether voice, "we need to tell someone. This isn't just about her being sad anymore. You saw what happened out there. She was convinced, utterly convinced, that Alder was still alive. Other people saw what happened too. They were all crowded around her like it was a TV show and not a fellow soldier having a breakdown." Abigail was bitter as she finished speaking. "Okay, fine," Rael huffed, relenting. "But who do we even tell? What do we even tell them? Hey, sorry, but our unit mate is losing it? We think she's grieving so much that she's hallucinating our dead general?" Abigail fixed her sister with a stare. "No. We tell them that we are worried about her, that she probably still has some unresolved trauma, and it's affecting her in a negative way. That's all we have to say, and then they can take it from there." "Okay, but who are we even going to tell, Abs?" Rael asked. "And Akostia went back to the basics head of base and is supervising new drill sergeants. And while I would trust Isadora with this, I don't think this is exactly her area of expertise." "My mother, obviously." Abigail sounded almost offended that Rael hadn't suggested her first. "Your mom?" Rael asked incredulously. "Seriously? You think she'll care? She's the general of the army now. She has a lot more on her plate right now." "My mom cares about Tally," Abigail argued. "About both of you. She'll care if Tally is hurting so much that it's affecting her like this. Especially if it could potentially affect her performance as a soldier." Rael's face twisted at Abigail's last sentence, but she knew deep down that Abigail was right. Petra was their best bet on getting Tally some help, and judging by what had happened outside not even an hour earlier, Tally desperately needed their help. Petra was only mildly surprised when her daughter and Rael burst into her office, but she was taken aback at their appearance. Clothes soaked, hair wet and disheveled, and Rael seemed to be shivering fiercely. "Girls," she said, raising an eyebrow at their appearance, "what's going on?" "Mom, we need to talk to you," Abigail said. "It looks like you girls need a change of clothes and a warm shower," Petra quipped. Rael shivered in response. "It's important," Abigail insisted, stepping forward. "It's about Tally." Petra's lips pursed. "A popular topic, as of late," she mused, mostly to herself. "What does that mean?" Rael asked, her eyes narrowing. Petra chose to ignore her. "What is it about Cadet Craven that has you bursting into my office, girls?" "She needs help, Mom." Abigail's voice took on a somber tone, one that had Petra cocking her head in interest. "We think she's really messed up about Alder." Petra tried not to let anything show on her face. "Messed up how?" she asked carefully. Abigail seemed to hesitate at this, as if she were unsure how to respond, before being interrupted by Rael. "With all due respect, ma'am, I think Tally is losing it." "Rael!" Abigail turned to face her, scandalized. "No, but I'm serious, ma'am," Rael continued, ignoring Abigail. "She keeps saying that she can feel Alder whenever Alder clearly isn't around, and today she—" Rael cut herself off and took a deep breath before plowing on. "Today she was acting like she could almost see Alder." Petra froze in her seat at this. "She took off running after nothing, Mom," Abigail chimed in. "It was like she saw a ghost or something. She just kept saying that she could feel her, and then she took off sprinting towards the forest, when there was clearly nothing there. She had a full-on breakdown. We're—" Abigail swallowed nervously. "We're worried about her," she finished quietly. "I see," Petra said evenly, trying not to give anything away in her voice. She looked back and forth between the two girls. If Telly's grief is affecting her this much, then I'm glad you brought this to my attention. Are we going to do something to help her? Rael's tone was a bit more than accusatory, as she stared at Petra. Yes, dear, of course, Petra said quickly. I'll see to it that Telly gets some help. But in the meantime, you two should continue to support her as a unit, and as her sisters. Yes, ma'am. Of course, both girls murmured in unison. Thank you for agreeing to help her. Rael seemed relieved, if not a bit surprised, that Petra had agreed so quickly. Petra gave her a tight-lipped smile, then nodded towards the door. You two should go get changed into some dry clothes. We don't need anyone catching colds. Her tone had stepped away from that of the general, and into something more motherly, but her words were still effective in holding their meaning. The girls were being dismissed. The girls nodded and quickly left her office, the door closing considerably more gently than it had when Adil had left her office some weeks ago. As soon as the door clicked shut, Petra sighed and dropped her head into her hands. She did not want to be dealing with this right now, but if Telly Craven had begun seeing Sarah Alder around campus, then... Petra sighed again, standing up to grab her coat. She hadn't taken Adil's warning seriously. She had assumed, incorrectly, that after the first incident with Telly almost spotting her, that Sarah would have been more careful walking around Fort Salem. That was evidently not the case. Petra could feel a headache forming as she walked across the base, throwing the occasional glance over her shoulder to make sure she wasn't being followed. It was almost dark now, despite the early hour, and the cold air of fall was threatening to cut through her jacket by the time she arrived at the unassuming shed hidden in the woods behind Fort Salem. Throwing another cursory glance around and finding herself to be alone, Petra stepped into the shed. To anyone who didn't know otherwise, it looked like an ordinary tool shed, but Petra did know otherwise. She closed the door behind her and stepped fully into the shed, beginning to sing a low seed in her throat. The back wall of the shed began to change at her work, shifting and grinding as its appearance changed to that of a door. Petra walked forward, opening the door, and descending down the stairs that were hidden behind it, until she reached another door at the bottom of the stairs. She knocked on the door twice, then traced a sigil with her nail over the doorknob, before pushing the door open and entering the room. Petra glanced around as she walked into the safe house, hidden underneath Fort Salem. She could hear music being played from a record player, presumably in another room, and she felt the door close automatically behind her. "It's just me," she called out as she stepped forward into the cozy living room area. A fire was burning in the fireplace, and a dog-eared book was lying on the coffee table that rested snugly between two maroon couches. "We need to talk." There was a noise from the kitchen area, a clattering of dishes being set down, and the soft footfall of steps had Petra turning to face the doorway to the kitchen. The shadow arrived first, thrown forward by the soft light coming from the kitchen, and then Sarah Alder stepped through the doorway, crossing her arms as she stared at Petra with her icy blue eyes. She looked different, softer somehow in civilian clothing, Petra thought, though she would never utter those words out loud. The plain black shirt and jeans, and was she barefoot? Petra thought curiously, but she didn't say anything. The strangeness of the civilian clothing and the wavy length of thick, dark hair that hung loosely around her face did nothing to soften the severe look that was on Sarah's face as she regarded Petra. "You're right," Sarah said simply. "We do need to talk." Petra let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "And what is it that you need to talk to me about?" A muscle jumped in Sarah's jaw, and her resolve seemed to splinter for a second, before hardening again, voice tense as she spoke. "I want you to let me see Tally Craven."
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.